Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's class. Let's go ahead and start. Jana's happy, I'm sure, to lead us in the verse. So I will turn it over to her. Let me put those on the screen. Again, these are just some prayers to help us to kind of put our minds in the right direction for the teachings tonight. So I'll turn it over to Jana.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Short mandala offering we'll do once in English tonight. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Mary, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as we would feel and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Radha Mandala Kavirayati. Refuge in Bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Sokti Chodam La Jangchu Bardu Dagi Chab Suchi Dagi Chonyen Gipe Sonam Di Drolap and cheer Sangye Drupar Show. Sangye Chodam Sokti Chodam La Jangchu Bardu Dagi Chab Suchi Dagi Chonyen Gipe Sonam Di Drolap and cheer Sangye Drupar Show.
Okay, thank you, Jana. Thank you, everyone. Let's do a short meditation before we begin the class. Just give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit and to let go of whatever distractions we might have. And then also to set our motivation together. So find a good meditation posture, one where the back is upright, but not rigid, just relaxing into this upright posture as best as you can. If you need to close the eyes, that's fine. If not, it's good to maybe keep them slightly open if that's comfortable for you. Keeps the mind a little more alert and awake. Just try to relax again into this posture, and we're going to do a few minutes of watching the breath. And if you have a technique that you already use with the breath, you can do that. If you need a suggestion, you might work with the sensation around the tip of the nose. When you're breathing in and out through the nostrils, there's that very subtle sensation that occurs in that area. And just making that your focal point, try to keep your awareness there as best as you can, as you inhale, as you exhale. But when you see that the mind has wandered from that object, gotten distracted in whatever way, then let go of whatever distracted you and gently guide the mind back to the breath. So I'll ring the bowl here to begin the meditation. We'll do a few minutes in silence on the breath, And then I'll lead you in a short reflection. So now let's take a moment to set our motivation for being here tonight. Let's recall that in this course, what we've been doing is examining all the various facets, features, functions of the mind. And recall that in Buddhism, mind is really central. Yes, we do experience an external world, and that external world does contribute to our well-being or our suffering in some way. But the real source of our happiness, the real source of our discontent, is within our own minds. And by mind, once more, we mean that non-material component of our being. This continuity, this stream of consciousness, awareness, that unfolds moment by moment. And of course, we have to recognize that our minds have been mainly controlled by the habits that we have, the things that we have done again and again that have shaped the way that we look at the world, how we react to things in our world. But nothing is hardwired. All of it can be changed. The Buddha says that with proper discipline and study, engaging in these teachings wholeheartedly, we can actually transform our minds to an unbelievable state. A state where we will have completely removed everything that is negative, all of the afflictions that we've been looking at recently in this course, all of our anger, our out of control desire, our jealousy, our pride, our ignorance, all of these can be removed completely so that they never return again. And in their place, we can have all the amazing good qualities of loving kindness and compassion, patience and wisdom. All these various features can be developed to a limitless degree. So in this course, we're trying to work with that idea of how do we reduce and eliminate eventually these negative tendencies, and how do we increase those that are positive. Kind of do these in tandem, recognizing that every negative state has its counterpart in a positive state. So as we spend another night examining this topic, let's set a good motivation for doing this. And it starts with ourselves. If we become our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe used to say, if we actually come to know our own minds, we can find greater peace, happiness, well-being. We can stop following those that lead to greater harm and suffering for ourselves and others, and adopting those that create more harmony, more connection, more love. So the immediate beneficiary of all this work is ourselves. Our own quality of life improves as we engage in this topic. And it's fine to start with that motivation, to be here with some desire to improve the quality of your own life. But because we are in the world among other beings, we can also hold an awareness of wanting to benefit them. As we reduce our own negative tendency, of course, those tendencies are there in that category because they often harm other beings. These negative states produce suffering for ourselves and for others. So we can be here with a motivation to refrain from harming others, to begin to even help them through more positive states to benefit them, so that we can do this work tonight for not just ourselves, but for all beings. With that wish to develop our own minds completely, so we then can attain the state of Buddhahood, state that the Buddha himself attained, and then help all beings to discover that potential within themselves. Try to hold that more far-reaching motivation as well as the more immediate motivation, wanting to be here to work on your own well-being, to go beyond that, to think that you're here also to embrace the well-being of all beings, all sentient beings. Wanting to develop your own mind so you can become of incredible benefit to each and every one of them. Okay. So just take a moment to come back into the space, and then we'll start the class for tonight. So again, we've been working with this topic of getting to know your mind for a few sessions now. I think tonight is six or seven, number seven. So again, if you haven't been at the other classes, don't worry. It's not a prerequisite. I will get everyone sort of up to speed with what we're currently looking at. This again is a course that's designed on the basis of what we traditionally study in this tradition of Tibetan Buddhism that's called awareness and knowers. And it's more specifically what's called minds and mental factors. There's this whole list. Again, these are the materials that we made available earlier on. I don't know, we might have some copies of some of these around here, but we also have them available through the website. There's a list of what are called these 51 mental factors. Again, mind is really central in Buddhism. This is kind of parsing up and dividing up the mind into various factors that play a role in our experience. And I'm not going to go back through all of these, but essentially we have some of those, the first two categories, that are really about shaping what we know. They're kind of the machine of the mind. How does the mind actually engage in objects and so on? Then we got into, and we haven't really been going through this in a more structured way, the 11 virtuous mental factors. These are the ones that the Buddha highlighted that we want to ideally develop. We have talked about a few of these, particularly number 4 and 5, because those are the opposite of the first two root afflictions that are at the bottom of the screen. So this is where we've been mainly spending our time the last several classes, is in this category that are called the 6 root afflictions. So the word affliction, again, is a term that is referring to these negative states of mind that we have that are disturbing for us. We can sometimes refer to them as disturbing emotions or as destructive emotions. They can have that effect on us. The first 3 are really often referred to as the 3 poisons, the ones that are really at the main root of all of our problems. We've gone through the first 2. Later tonight, we're going to start on the 3rd one, but we're going to move on to 4 before we go back to number 3. But let's talk about those first 2, attachment and anger, just to kind of refresh our memories as to what we covered with regard to those, because we spent a fair amount of time on both of those. These are kind of our 2 most habitual patterns of how we kind of react to things. We have the mechanism of the mind that we were talking about earlier that I just, again, ran through really quickly. I didn't even go through the specific mental factors. We come into contact with a lot of different objects throughout our day. That contact, if you will, is always going to produce some level of a feeling. And by feeling, we don't mean the whole range of emotions. We mean a feeling tone, something that registers as either being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And if we think about it and you examine during your day, you'll see that at any moment you're experiencing one of those 3 things. And hopefully right now you're not experiencing unpleasant. I hope you're not experiencing unpleasant, but you might have neutral, you might have something pleasant. But the idea is when those things register for us, for the pleasant and the unpleasant, we tend to fall into these habitual patterns. Attachment, desire, grasping at what is pleasant. Like we think about our relationship with food or other sense objects, we often kind of just lose ourselves in those objects. We go grasping and craving for them, and then we find it hard to let go of them. We want to keep them in our lives. That's the pattern of attachment. Whereas the opposite, when we experience something that is unpleasant, it causes this mind of anger or aversion to arise, where we're trying to push that out of our experience. We have a negative reaction to that. So both of those are distorted states of mind. The attachment one feels good though, right? It's all about getting what is pleasant. Yes, I'll have some more of that ice cream cake, as Anne Marie would say. I want more, whatever it is that is bringing me that happiness, those pleasant feelings. But when in the process of doing this, we create these unhealthy patterns. Of course, we see them in our world in really exaggerated forms as addictions and what have you, where people become totally addicted to various substances that they find it hard to separate from because of the patterns of addiction and habit that they brought into that relationship with those objects. But this is what we all have this pattern. Remember, I quoted Venerable Rabina, we're all like junkies born into a world of junk. I mean, all of this around us, all these delicious, delightful things are just enticing and pulling us in and causing us to get really distracted in those ways. But when we get the opposite, the things that are unpleasant, then we have this reaction that's, again, wanting to get those things out of our lives. We might even harm beings or do things that are really negative on the basis of that, trying to remove those from our lives. So these are the 2 main patterns we're falling into, these first 2 of the root afflictions, going after, craving all those that are delicious and delightful, pushing away what is unpleasant and even painful for us to experience. In the end, there's really just a sensation that we're experiencing, a sensation of pleasantness, a sensation of unpleasantness. Everything else is a sort of story that we tell ourselves. And that creates our relationship with those objects. We can tell different stories. Now, of course, with attachment, we can tell the story of non-attachment, recognizing the fleeting, impermanent nature, the transitory nature of all those experiences of pleasure, recognizing that it's an exaggeration, that there really isn't those sorts of, the pleasure to the degree that we think is there, isn't really there. This is something we're going to go into a little more detail tonight when we talk about the 3rd root affliction, this ignorance that's kind of the way that we're not seeing things correctly to begin with. But essentially, we can undermine our attachment, and we can also undermine, of course, the mind of anger, the mind of the aversion towards all of those things that are unpleasant, by recognizing, again, that there are different ways we can frame those situations. If somebody is accosting us and saying negative things to us, sure, it's unpleasant to hear that, but we could actually have love and compassion for that being at that time, rather than hatred and anger, right? So these are all the things that we've been examining. as I was saying in the meditation, we have essentially two different states of mind, the positive states of mind and the negative states of mind. Those are the main ones that we focus on in Buddhism. And with every one of them that is negative, there's a corresponding positive state of mind that can be the counterpart to that we really want to cultivate as an antidote to that. And that's the way I've been approaching this whole topic in this course, is just for us to become, as I said in the motivation as well, our own therapists. It was Lama Yeshe's phrase. He said, you have to become your own therapist. You have to be able to look at your own mind and make more concrete choices about which mind states you follow and which you don't follow. So far, we've just been under the control of those that we have habitually followed, and we haven't even questioned them. So we have to get, greater skill and ability at doing this. That's again the aim of this course. So any questions on that idea before we move on to kind of what we were talking about at the end of last week? By the way, thank you all for allowing me to do that from Santa Fe. There was no way I could have made the trip up here. So appreciative that you allowed me to do that online. Yes, Mary Jo.
What again did you call those first three?
They're often called the three poisons.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll see, again, all of the sort of secondary, we have been touching on those, what are called the secondary afflictions. They derive from those three. They're flavored by those three, if you will. They're extensions of those three. Even the mind of pride that we're going to talk about tonight, it's one of the six. Let's go back to and put that on the screen, where we do have this list of the 6 root afflictions. The first 3, attachment, anger, ignorance, are these 3 poisons. These are the main ones that we are battling and working with all the time. Then pride, we started looking at pride in last week's class. This is said to be a root affliction. It's highlighted because of the role that pride plays in blocking our spiritual development. If we really have a prideful mind towards our own knowledge, our own abilities, and we look down on others and feel that we're superior to them, well, then we don't learn from others. We don't see them as being, advantageous to us in our spiritual path. So it's highlighted because of the role it plays in kind of blocking our spiritual development. But we could say pride is essentially a form of attachment. It's a form of attachment to ourselves and our feeling about ourselves that is often exaggerated, as we're going to see when we get into this in more detail tonight, and then holding ourselves to be very important and superior in the midst of that, strong grasping at this idea of ourselves that we're attached to. The 5th one, afflicted doubt, is really kind of a form of ignorance. Doubt is sort of something that blocks us from moving forward in our wisdom. We're going to get to that a little bit later in this course. And then afflicted views are also a form of kind of a distorted intelligence, if you will, a way of looking at things incorrectly. And we're going to touch on one of those perhaps a little later tonight, the one that is also very akin to our ignorance, this 3rd poison that we'll be going into. But again, these are really at the heart of so much of what the Buddha taught. These 3 root poisons are what is involved in a good share, again, of every day of our lives. Ignorance, as we'll see, is sort of underneath the surface of so many of these, especially a particular form of ignorance that is our not seeing how we exist, how everything in the world exists. We are blind to that reality, and we mistakenly think things exist in a way that is totally the opposite of how they actually exist. Then, on the basis of that, again, we have these 2 responses. Towards what is pleasant, we get attached to it, grasp at it, desire it. And then when we don't get what we want, when we get something unpleasant, then we have a mind that is averse to that. And this can be a whole range of things, as we saw when we went through that 2nd poison there. It can be irritation, annoyance, anger, hatred, rage. All these kinds of mind states that can be developed to pretty horrible degrees. We see them in our world, right? How people can be driven by a lot of anger or aversion towards other people or other situations. And then, of course, underneath it all is this attachment, this desire, always craving and wanting what we feel will satisfy us. But as we saw when we went through that, those things never ultimately satisfy. We just become like junkies, continuing to go after them again and again, and never really finding any peace. So these are both the first 2 very disturbing states of mind. They are not peaceful at all. Is there any other comments or questions before we go on to pride? Yeah, Stella.
Excuse me, Don. I recently was listening to these teachings,
Mhm.
and
they said that spiritual pride is one of the last
Mhm.
really great uh, afflictions that we need to get rid of before
Yeah.
we can become enlightened. Could you give me an example? I mean, spiritual pride, is that just that you think that you know it all, that you're there already, that you're enlightened already, or I mean,
Again, as I understand spiritual pride, I mean, obviously, when we talk about pride as a general delusion, we can see how it plays out in a variety of ways in our lives. Spiritual pride is that dimension where we look at anything we've acquired around our spirituality. It can be our practice, it can be our study, it can be whatever, and those sorts of things. It's almost like a form of spiritual materialism, as Chogyam Trungpa used to call it, right? Where we are holding those things in some sort of comparison mode with what others possess. And we do that, of course, with material things as well in our world. When we start doing that with our spirituality, it becomes problematic because then we're always looking at others again in the light of, if the spiritual pride is present, we think we have more knowledge, we have greater practice, we've made further progress, whatever the case might be, compared to others. And it's just such a fallacy in terms of, first of all, we have no idea the level of development of other people, right? We can all sit in a room like this, and here I am as a teacher, and you're all there in the role of student, but your development may be much, much greater than mine. And that's something I have to kind of be able to hold to, and not come from a place of always feeling like my knowledge is superior, my practice is superior, or whatever. And I think even when we start dealing with this in our world, with the Buddhist view, I mean, Lama Yeshe used to talk about this all the time, about how we have to make sure we don't have a kind of attachment to our spiritual path, which becomes a form of pride, right? I mean, one of the things that I kind of keeps me in check to some degree is all the interfaith work that I do. In Santa Fe, I love doing interfaith work where I'm sitting at a table with folks from Christian, Jewish, sometimes Islamic traditions. We don't have as many Islamic folks represented in Santa Fe, but certainly even things beyond those more kind of core traditions, people who are very dedicated and devoted to their own practices. And it's really humbling to be in their presence because they are as deeply committed to their practice as what every one of us should be, right? And so sometimes that comes up in those gatherings though too, right? Where we start seeing, oh well, all these beings, they don't have it figured out. They haven't figured out what the Buddha's teaching, blah, 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 blah. We start putting this sort of trip on everybody. And yes, you can have that understanding that what we have to offer and what the Buddha teaches is something that could have universal ramifications that we could extend to all beings and want to bring to all beings. But we can't hold that view of thinking like we're better or we're superior. That gets in the way. It just becomes an obstacle. Kind of keeps us from moving forward in our own spiritual development, but it also blocks our kind of ability to be with others in a more genuine way, a place of humility. There's that wonderful verse. I may have mentioned it in last week. I don't remember. From Geshe Langri Tongpa's 8 Verses of Thought Training, where he says, when in the company of others, I shall always consider myself the lowest among all and respectfully hold others dear and supreme from the depths of my heart. That's the sort of attitude. And we see it embodied in His Holiness the Dalai Lama or these other great masters. They don't walk into a room and think it's all about them, and like they're the the head honcho and whatever. They come, His Holiness, when he comes in, he's like this, he's bending over. Oh, I think the screen froze a little bit here.
Yeah, it did.
All right. Everyone else is moving. But let me make sure I'm still connected to the right thing here. Yeah, I'm connected to your phone. Maybe try. Is there a way to turn the camera off and turn it back on and see if it does anything? Anyway, I just noticed that when I look down at my screen here. So let me see if I can do it here. Let me just stop video. Oh, there, you've done it. Okay. When you come back in, maybe it'll reset. But anyway, His Holiness, it's, as I was saying, has this incredible just ability to be so humble and feel like he's really in the presence of beings who are to be embraced and to be really just thought of as, the ideal thing. Now we're not. I mean, I can put my camera on, but it's going to be a little not such good quality. I didn't bring my. Sorry, folks. Has it ever done this before? This is a new one. Okay.
A brand new affliction.
A new technological affliction.
Well, I see people on the Zoom moving around.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like things are fine on Zoom, but for some reason the camera here in the Gompa had frozen up and now we can't seem to get it reconnected. Well, let me go ahead and keep talking. And if nothing else, we at least have the recording of the
Well,
voice.
why don't you turn your
Turn my-
camera on and just ignore mine?
Okay. And then in terms of the recording, do we need to remove the spotlight for?
I will turn it to the spotlight on to use.
Okay.
Look at that, you're moving.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. All right. Yeah, the camera quality is much poorer with this than with the one that you had, but I can't get that to work. Okay, so anyway, back to wrap up what Stella was pointing to in this, topic of spiritual pride. I mean, spiritual pride is going to become this huge obstacle to us, and that may be why I don't know, again, this teaching that you saw, where they say that that's kind of the last thing to fall away, because at some point, I mean, it does take confidence. Confidence and pride are two different things, though. Confidence where we really feel like over time we've gained some ability to practice well. That's a really good thing to have. But if it becomes prideful, then we move into, again, some grasping at ourselves in a superior way. Yeah, Maka. And then we'll come to you, Mary Jo.
I don't know how this fits in, but kind of fits in. So in 2013, there was the big Earth Summit with the Dalai Lama, and it was the first day. And there were these folks from different backgrounds on stage, the Catholic priest and the rabbi. And the Dalai Lama turned to the rabbi with his little smile and he said, "I heard that you're the chosen people." And he just laughed.
He has a good time with people of other faiths.
He does.
And again, you kind of keep it all in that vein of just really appreciating who people are and what they have found. I mean, he's written many books that express his embracing of a diverse spiritual traditions in our world. The necessity of that, because if you had a restaurant that served one dish, then you aren't going to get very many people, right? Because people have different tastes. Whereas if you have a cafeteria or a variety of things on your menu, well, then people will come with all different kinds of tastes. And it's the same thing with regard to spirituality. We can't expect that, one size fits all kind of thing. So anyway, yeah, Mary Jo, thanks for sharing that, Mika. Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking about this situation, and I think it could be a kind of that pride that I have a friend, and she's sort of more or less a Buddhist, and she lives remotely, and we talk by phone fairly often, and often I hear us saying and thinking too, wow, I'm so fortunate that my path in Buddhism crossed. And so we talk together, sort of like saying, wow, I feel so fortunate and so lucky. But in a way, I think that's a kind of pride.
It can be. Again, and these are tricky things because once more, just like I was saying, having that kind of confidence in our path, a part of it is feeling some deep appreciation for what we have found that resonates with us. I think where it becomes prideful is when we think that we've got it better than everybody else or something in some ways.
Yeah.
Oh, we figured it all out and you all haven't. Some of my readings I've done with our interfaith group, there's a interesting book called When Religion Goes Astray. And one of the things it touches on there is this whole idea of exclusivity, which is a form of pride. When a specific spiritual tradition says, we've figured it out and you all are wrong, that's essentially the most prideful mind you can have in your spiritual path, because it's not embracing the ability to totally be kind of honor and respect what other people have found in their own lives, that feed them, that give them their purpose and their meaning, right? So yes, I think that it can veer into that, but nonetheless, a deep appreciation that we have ourselves for what we have found isn't problematic until it becomes a sense of superiority over others. That's always the tension there with the exclusivity, is that each of us has to have at some level, if we're really committed to our path, some deep devotion to it and a feeling good that we have found this for ourselves. But that can't become exclusive and thinking that everyone else therefore has it wrong and we've all figured it out kind of thing. Then it becomes a problem, right?
No.
Yeah. And
I just wanted to comment
Mhm.
because, a couple weeks ago, John and Jenna
Mm-hmm.
showed us Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And, that was so funny. So
mission
incredible.
joy. Yeah.
And they loved each other so much. And, and they recognized their different paths,
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah. And I think when we see these sorts of things, that resonates so much more with us, right, than when we see the opposite, when you see people being very exclusive around their own traditions and thinking everyone else is their traditions are garbage. It's only my tradition. Mine's the only one that matters kind of thing. So let's go a little further into this mind of pride. Again, we touched on it last week. Let me go ahead and...
Excuse me, Dawn, can I
Oh,
just?
yes.
a
Oh, please.
little
Yes.
thing?
Uh-huh.
So would you say it's better for us so that we don't land in this position that we don't compare ourselves with others?
Well, I don't think there's really much use in comparing unless you want to feel more inspired by those that are around you, that you feel like if there are practitioners who you feel really embody the way that you would like to be, not out of an envy or anything, out of just that seems more genuine and ideal for your practice. That's what our teachers often are, right? Like in His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we can look at him and go, wow, he's got something. I want that. I want to be able to be like that. Then I think that's okay. It's a form of comparison where we see that we don't have what others who are in a more superior mode have, but it doesn't become about pride then, right? It becomes actually motivates us to move in that direction. So I think there's some level of comparison that can happen. Maybe where comparison becomes judgment is the problem, because judgment then becomes about better, worse, whatever. I mean, if comparison is there and it spurs you on in your practice, I think that's fine. But in general, I think it's good just to practice more genuinely yourself. And I think each of us has our own inner awareness of when we are going astray or when we are more on track and moving in the right direction, and to trust that to some extent. But yeah, certainly feel inspired by those around you who embody how you would like to be in your own spiritual path. I don't think there's any problem there. Let me go ahead and get on the screen the slides for today. Let me go back here, get out of that, and share screen. Okay, and we'll be up and going. So what I wanted to do last week, I did touch on pride just a little bit and gave you the more kind of textbook definition of this. And I am starting with, because as I said, this is a whole branch of study that they do in the monastic traditions and what have you, and give people kind of an encyclopedia of what goes on in their mind. Again, this is where we were in terms of this list of these 6 that I had on the screen earlier from that longer list of 51. Pride or self-importance, sometimes even referred to as arrogance. This was the definition that we worked with in the last class. At the very end, I introduced this. And here, Geshe Rabten, in his book on mind and its functions, which goes through the entire list of the 51 and also a bit more about Buddhist epistemology, how the mind knows, and so on. He says here, self-importance or pride is a distinct mental factor that, based upon this view of the transitory composite, and we're going to talk about that a little later tonight, but I'll give you a shorthand for it in a moment, apprehending either the inherent I or mine, strongly grasped at an inflated or superior image of oneself. So what this is saying is that this pride is always, when we're talking about it as this delusion, as this affliction, it's always together with this distorted view of the self, the I. And this, of course, is, as we're going to see when we begin to examine ignorance and this particular mental factor that's mentioned here, this view of the transitory composite. This is kind of what's underneath the surface of everything. That's our third poison. That's the root poison, the main poison. Because what happens there, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit now anyway, because we're going to be moving into that tonight, is that we have this kind of mind and body. Every one of us has a mind and body. And in relation to this, we think that there's a real I here. We're not recognizing that this sense of an I is really just that. It's an idea of an I. There's no real I here. And whenever we have this present, this is the ground upon which all of our delusions arise. All the other afflictions, by the way, delusions, afflictions, disturbing emotions, negative emotions, destructive emotions, these are all the same thing. They're referring to any of these distorted states of mind. Anger and attachment, those first two, as well as all the other afflictions. They all arise together with this fundamental ignorance that is not seeing things correctly. The main thing it's not seeing correctly is the I. But of course, this distortion happens with regard to everything that exists. We'll talk about that more when we get into that ignorance. But the distorted sense of an I is necessary for us to have a pride in that I, because pride is a sense of self-importance. To other people. So the I, one pattern we fall into with it is some pride, holding that I to be superior. So if you don't have that false sense of an I, you can't really have pride, right? Because pride is based on that. Pride is one of the delusions that is singled out in particular as always revolving around a sense of an I, because that's the nature of it. It's the very nature of it, right? We don't have, again, anything that we would feel prideful about unless we're holding on to this strong sense of an I at the root of all of it. So we will get into that a bit more as we go through tonight. Oh, we got the other camera back on.
Yeah, you can turn yours off now.
Okay. But we need to maybe change the spotlight then too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that one will be a little bit better quality, I think. Do you have that? Let me remove it from mine. Whoops. Somehow I got the other one on, John, not the, oh no, it is. It's on mine. That's the problem. I forget that I've got my computer in front of me. That's not what you're all seeing. Okay, there you go.
For some reason, it's different. I'm seeing both you blanked out and then this one. Oh, because I still have you spotlighted. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. All right, let's go back to that slide and get grounded again once more in that definition that I set out for this from Geshe Rabten. So again, on the basis of this holding to a real I, or the term here, mine, I or mine, M-I-N-E. Mine is when the I is a possessor. We're not talking about the things that the I possesses, like an ear or, a rosary, a mala, or whatever it is, a computer. We're talking about the I that is the possessor, the I that owns things, which is one of the main things that I gets caught up in, right? Owning this, owning that, even owning this body. But there is this false sense of an I at the root then of pride that then strongly grasps at an inflated or superior image of oneself. This is one of the natures of all of these delusions as well. They exaggerate. They kind of take something that they are starting with and then they embellish it and make it even more. And in the case of pride, it makes us have a sense of superiority. A sense of we have more going on than anyone else in regard to the various things that pride is attending to. We can have pride in our wealth. We can have pride in our appearance. We can have pride in so many different things, right? Because that's just the nature of our delusion of pride. It grasps at anything that we think is superior to what others have. And then we elevate ourselves on the basis of that, thinking that we are better, superior to others who don't have that. Now, what's interesting, and this is I hope you find this kind of insightful. When I first encountered this many, many years ago, I think I told you all this course, the foundations of this course were one of the very first courses I took with this organization, FPMT, back in 1996 at Seichen Ling, our center in San Francisco. And anyway, Venerable Robina, who I just mentioned earlier, and she's one of my dearest teachers, but she did a whole course on this. And when I first encountered this, I thought this was pretty outrageous. Normally when we say the word pride, we think it's pretty contained, right? We all know what pride is. Well, guess what, folks? There are 7 different types of pride that are discussed in Buddhism. And they all do have a slightly different flavor. So let's take a look at the first 3, which I find really quite compelling right from the beginning. There's what's called lesser, greater, and extreme pride or self-importance. These three forms of self-importance or pride are said to be materially oriented, since they arise in relation to such things as social standing, wealth. I mean, things in maybe material isn't quite the right thing. It's like externally related. They have a lot of things to do with kind of how we are comparing ourselves to others and feeling superior on the basis of people feel superior on the basis of their heritage, on the basis of their gender, on the basis of a variety of things, right? They hold on to these sorts of views. Well, in this case, we're talking about a lot of things that, we could probably compare ourselves to others, thinking we have greater social standing, greater wealth, greater knowledge, what have you. So let's look at these in terms of each of these and kind of how they're spelled out. The very first one, lesser self-importance, comes about through comparing oneself to those who appear to have less than oneself. I like how he phrases it, appear to have less than oneself, because once more, we really don't know. I mean, you can be walking on the street and see someone who may appear to be unhoused and not having, a job and what have you, but we don't know for sure who that person is. And they might appear to have less than oneself. This is the thought that considers, I am greater than those who have an inferior social position and who are poorer in knowledge and wealth than myself. That's what we normally think of as pride, right? When we look down on others because we see them through how they appear to us as being less than, being inferior to. Some of this is even called inferior self-importance or inferior pride. You might think again, well, that covers pride. Well, not so. The next one is a greater self-importance. This arises in relation to those who are actually equal to oneself. This pride considers, although they may be equal to me in their social position, etc., all the various factors we might be comparing ourselves to others with, nevertheless, through my inner qualities of generosity, morality, and so on, I am superior to them. It's like we manage to find something within ourselves, in spite of the fact that we're sort of equal with another, to feel like we're still superior. You can see how it starts getting a little more distorted, right? Because here you actually have people who are on a pretty level playing field, and we want to still hold that we're better than them in some capacity, right? Well, guess what the next one goes to? Extreme self-importance takes as its object those who are actually superior to oneself and considers, even compared to those who have greater social standing, wealth, knowledge, and so on than myself, I am nevertheless superior. I mean, that you can see like that's totally out of whack. It would be like for me to say, the Dalai Lama, he's got nothing on me. It feels weird even to say those words, right? Because that's just it's so outrageously ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
To think that you have greater qualities than those who actually are superior to you. Again, I love how this points out how our pride.
But you have to define superior. It's
True.
not necessarily wealth or knowledge or stuff.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, once more, we run into this whole thing where all three of these that, are based on some level of seeing others and in thinking you're superior to them, whether they are actually lower, equal, or superior to you. But they're all still really just a judgment on the basis of some limited criteria. We have no idea. And there are those stories, right, of like these amazing beings. There was a wonderful story that His Holiness tells frequently about Patrul Rinpoche, this great master, who of course was really revered and honored in the monasteries, and he would be put on the high throne to teach and all this, and he was really like, okay, enough of this and everything, and he would need to get away from it at times. So he would just put on regular clothes and he'd go wandering. And he'd end up in these villages and people would host him in their home, and he would do these very menial tasks for them in order to stay there. He'd had no pretense about, I'm better than you. I need to be in the best bed in the house or all these other kinds of things. He would just stay in whatever accommodations they had and do whatever tasks were necessary. And His Holiness tells this story because what happened apparently was that they needed him back at the monastery. And so a group of monks came and they were coming through that area. And they said, oh, have you seen Patrul Rinpoche? And they said, there's no Rinpoche here. And they started to describe what Patrul Rinpoche looks like. And the families' faces are gradually like going, red, like, oh my gosh, we've got this Rinpoche here. At that moment, they said that Patrul Rinpoche was actually emptying the chamber pot in the house, like cleaning all the feces and whatever out of the pot. I mean, this was just who he was, right? He didn't have that pretense. He didn't see himself as superior. But that could be, any of us could be work in relation to some sort of amazing Rinpoche, some sort of amazing being. But we might look down on them, or we might think that, lesser of them, because we don't really have perfect knowledge of what other people's qualities are. That's why, again, it's best not to get into that whole comparison thing, because how do we have any idea? And like I said, some of my most humbling experiences have been being around people from other faith traditions. I left the Catholic Church when I was quite young because it didn't work for me. But I mean, I sit at the table with many folks who are Christian, and when they speak about some of their spiritual experiences, they sound quite amazing. Like, oh my gosh, who am I to question their experiences? Who am I to even think that somehow I have anything on them? I can't tell what, has happened to them and the things that have brought them to that place in their life. So again, I think that's the best approach, is just to kind of be there and be with others in a much more genuine, kind of open way, and be somewhat humble. It is kind of interesting that I did mention earlier that for each of these afflictions, we do have something that is kind of the counterforce to it. Humility isn't really on our list of the virtuous mental factors, but it's obviously the state of mind that we want to counter our pride with. And humility just means, once more, seeing ourselves in a much more neutral light, not kind of charged with whatever sort of stuff we're attached to in regard to our position, social standing, wealth, knowledge, practice, whatever it is that we are going to latch onto and think that we've got something better than what other people have. If we're just in a more humble position, I think I mentioned this in last week's class, kind of like the valleys rather than the mountaintops. They use this analogy in Tibet because in Tibet there's the Himalayan range. It covers the borders with all of other countries, and then everything from there goes down into the Tibetan plateau, and they're wonderful lush valleys. Well, they say don't be like the mountaintop, because nothing grows on the mountaintop, right? There's nothing happening up there. It's just all this snow that melts down and comes into the valley. That's where it's lush and green. That's where you actually grow. And the same idea, if we are humble and we are kind of with others in a much more genuine way, so that we are, trying to attend to them, to serve them, to be a benefit to them, then we're able to grow so much more, rather than thinking that everyone has to attend to us. Yes, Ed, please.
If we were convinced that there is no I to begin with, that we wouldn't have a problem with pride.
If we came to dismantle the I that is at the root of the problem, this sense of a real I, if we absolutely, like you're saying, Ed, if we dismantled that and no longer had that, there'd be no ground for pride. Of course, there'd also be no ground for any of these other delusions, afflictions, because everything is revolving around this strong sense of a real I. And again, it's not saying, when I use that term real I, that doesn't mean there is no I at all. It just means that the sense of a real I that we have is fiction. There is an I, but the I exists really, really subtly. And if you have that view of how subtle it is and have refuted this exaggerated sense of an I, well, then there's no ground for pride to arise. There's no ground for any of these afflictions to arise, because you are then in harmony with how things actually exist. It's the final antidote, as we'll see when we get into that. So let's go on with these. I do find these first three really compelling. Like I said, just the fact that people can, take pride to such extremes, right? Now, number 4 is an interesting one: egoistic self-importance. This conceited attitude is an inflated state of mind that results from imagining one's aggregates, the components of body and mind, to be something perfect. It then strongly conceives of that which is not this self-existent person, this real I that I was talking about, to be a real person, a real I, and of that which does not belong to such a self-existent person to belong to such a self-existent person. It sounds it's a bunch of words. What is it getting at? It's getting at the idea that we have this sense of a pride that is kind of even taking that distorted sense of an I and holding it to be something quite perfect, quite extraordinary. It's like another level of pride, where it's like we're taking just this different view of this I, this false sense of this I, and we're holding that to be this kind of ideal I, if you will. It's kind of a weird one. I haven't gotten my head completely around it, but it's obviously very much involved in the distorted view that we begin with. That root the root of ignorance that's underneath all of this, that is driven by holding to the strong sense of an I. We have this feeling that there's something kind of genuine and real about that. And we even kind of hold on to that sense of an I in a really quite profound way. And of course, it's once more a distortion. I think this does come up very much around identity. You know, when we do start talking about how people have a sense of pride in their identity, well, that's because they have all these various things that are just temporary features in this life, right? If we go into the Buddhist view of what's going on, you know, from lifetime to lifetime, is we have this stream of awareness that goes back without any beginning, and it goes forward without any end. Even when we become a Buddha, there's still no end to that mind. But that mind then goes through different iterations of identity. Like in this life, each of us has all the various things that we think of as this sense of an I. We might think of ourselves as male or female or non-binary or whatever, you know, labels people use for their gender. We might think of ourselves in terms of our sexual orientation. We think of ourselves in terms of our age, our heredity, all the various things that, you know, our ancestral roots and all of these various things. We might think of ourselves in terms of the roles that we've played, the jobs that we've had, the various things we've learned, or arts and crafts that we've mastered, or whatever the case might be. We get very caught up in a sense of an identity of the person that is really just from the bookend of when this life started to when this life ends, and is a purely temporary phenomenon, right? That whole sense of an I that is kind of contained within that is, in my estimation, what's really going on with this fourth level of pride, is we kind of think the kind of perfection of the sense of an I that we have, embracing all the various facets and features of that I that are really just, again, passing phenomena. There's nothing really inherent in any of those. I'll tell a story to illustrate this. I don't think I've told this story as part of this course. A Venerable Rabina story again. Sorry if you get tired of Venerable Rabina stories, but most of you know she started our prison project. And one of the things she would do is visit men in prison whenever she had the chance. And she was down in Kentucky, where she had made a really nice kind of contact with a number of men who I think were lifers or possibly even on death row. But this is a combination in this case of like both African American and Caucasian men who were in prison together. And she was talking to them about rebirth, about the fact that when they were reborn, that they could end up being, when they were white in this lifetime, black in the next life, or they could be black in this lifetime and be white in the next life. And she said she remembers how this was so outrageous for these men because they just had such a strong identity of the race that they had, the color of skin that they had, and what have you. And then she told me, she says, I didn't dare tell them that they could be reborn as a white woman or a white woman, because that would be just like totally blow them away, right? You know, because we're not inherently male or female either, right? We cling to our sense of our gender, our identity, and we think there's something kind of perfect about that. We like who we are generally. I mean, there are certainly people who don't like who they are, who, you know, develop some sort of hatred or self, what's the right word for it? You know, it's deprecation on the basis of what qualities they have. But most of us think we're quite like a little perfect package. You know, we are this little package of all these various things that we have become and that are a part of our life. And we kind of hold some view of that as being quite ideal. So it's all based on a false concept of an I to begin with. And then we are holding on to the various aspects of that and elevating it to another sense of the idealness or perfectness of that I. Does that make some sense? No. So anyway, that's the fourth one. I love how these things, again, is like, whoever thought about pride so much? I mean, I certainly did before finding these teachings. Number 5. Oh, I'm sorry, Mary Jo, did you want to have something?
Yes, isn't it possible that also can be a negative sense of self? Like, I am so mad, a big fuck up. I will never be anything,
Right.
You know, like that. I think
Self-hatred
it's fixated anyway, and
Mhm.
I think people do get attached to those things,
Yeah.
kind of like, oh yeah, I might as well go rob that store. I got nothing better to do, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Is that a form of pride?
I think it can be. It can be kind of an inverted form of pride where we're not looking at what is positive or good about ourselves and elevating it. We might be looking at what is negative, and becomes the whole picture of what we see as ourselves. It's interesting. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in a discussion with Western teachers many, many years ago, they were asking him, how do we deal with students who have kind of a lot of self-loathing, a lot of self-deprecation, this kind of mindset? And His Holiness was puzzled at this because this is not something that he saw in his culture. He said, no, people think most of themselves. They think a lot more of themselves. They don't think less of themselves. But the more he thought about it, the more he actually said, this is also kind of this distorted way of holding on to some view of ourselves, but it just becomes kind of again inverted, where we are still the same mechanism as what we were just talking about, where you're thinking there's this real I and you're elevating it to some degree. It's just you're elevating it on the basis of what you see as flaws in it and faults in it, as opposed to what you see as qualities and so on. It's not usually singled out as pride in this presentation, but nonetheless, there's an interesting little take on it that we're going to see coming up, though, where you actually can even take pride in being humble. Like you can be thinking you're the humblest person in the room, which is kind of a weird inversion of pride, too. But this is another one I think that you're pointing out, Mary Jo, that could happen. Yeah. Yeah. And
So, I'm thinking about the guy with the chamber pot, the Rinpoche.
right. Right.
So if people knew he was Rinpoche, do you think they would all want to take out chamber pots?
I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's a possibility.
Yeah. Again, I don't know.
To emulate him, you mean?
Huh?
To emulate him?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, but when we see people like that again, that are just they're quite content. There's a modern day practitioner, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, who wrote a book called In Love with the World. I've only read parts of it. My dear friend Tenzin Choki has read the whole thing, and she really keeps encouraging me to read it, but I just haven't had the time to get through it all. But he took like this sort of street retreat kind of thing. He took his robes and everything. He's an ordained monk, and he left them all behind, and he just went out to try to survive on just the kindness of others and to see how it was like to be an ordinary being out on the streets. He almost died. He, got to a point where he was malnourished and what have you because he wasn't receiving what he
Was
needed.
it in Colorado?
I don't remember. Yeah.
I heard that story before.
Anyway, it's supposed to be a really interesting book about like kind of his experience of kind of going to that, because we do tend to cling to once more kind of what is comfortable for us, and we have some pride in our status of whatever, and then what is it like to actually shed all of that and to say, okay, I'm going to live without all those sort of trappings and those things that I view as my identity, and just kind of be out there. And you've got some interesting lessons. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. So I think these are all kind of dimensions of what we see in regard to pride, and its opposite when people practice humility can be quite drawn to people who are humble. This is number 5, full-blown self-importance. Negative human qualities, that is, all activities that arise from attachment, hatred, and bewilderment, are countered by the superior qualities of mental absorption and meditation. This is what we practice in this tradition, is, developing deeper meditative awareness and investigation of the teachings, generating realizations, all of this. He goes on to say then, full-blown self-importance is the grossly inflated attitude of one who, without having realized any of these superior qualities, is convinced that they have. So the idea here is that your pride could become really distorted if you suddenly start thinking that you've got all these amazing realizations and, spiritual attainments when you don't even have a single one of them, or what you have is very, very weak. Now, this is where once more it goes back to, I think, what you brought up earlier, Stella, of, a spiritual pride. If we are actually on this track where we think we have all these amazing qualities that we really don't possess yet. I mean, that's why a lot of people are a bit dismayed when they come to Buddhism, and people tend not to talk about their practice or even certainly their attainments. I mean, look at once more His Holiness the Dalai Lama. he gets in front of a group of people and he says, I'm just a simple Buddhist monk, he doesn't have any airs of being any great practitioner. He says, oh yeah, compassion, I've meditated on that. I have some taste for it, but so he says these things that, you kind of want to go, come on, you got to have some of these realizations. You've been, you're like this amazing being. How can you not have these realizations? But they never come out and say that, right? Because they want to, again, embody the humility, like what you were saying, Anne Marie. They want to be the person who cleans the chamber pot. They want to be the person who's always seeing themselves in that light, and that's the role that they play in the world, is to be an example of humility, because it's an important one on our spiritual path, right? So that's, again, my understanding of this one. It really is a one that becomes very problematic in regard to our spiritual progression. Number 6 is the one that's got 2 different meanings to it: self-effacing self-importance. This pride is an inflated state of mind that considers, since I have only a fraction of the social standing, knowledge, etc., of those superior to me, I'm truly humble and insignificant. It's kind of like what I was saying earlier, pride of humility. Like, I just have a fraction of the Dalai Lama's qualities, just like we kind of put ourselves down. There's a bit of that flavor to it, thinking, oh, we're just such a humble little being or whatever. I have to admit, there was one practitioner in our master's program cohort that would always be like kind of this bowing at everybody and opening the door for everybody, waiting till everybody had gone through before they went through and all this. And it was kind of endearing at first, and it got to be kind of annoying. Like, okay, come on, just be with everybody else and don't. And it felt like, and who am I to judge? Again, this is my own pride probably coming out. But who am I to judge, someone else's stuff? But it appeared to me like there was that contest, like, I'm going to try to be the humblest person in the master's program, So I think we have to be careful that we don't find that's a weird inversion of our pride too, where we think, oh, I'm just going to be the little speck of dirt in the floor or something, and think that's that low of ourselves that it almost becomes a form of weird pride. This is the alternate description. Let me do this and then I'll come to you, Stella. Yeah. Pride of slight inferiority. This is described in this case as a puffing up of the mind, thinking that one is just a little lower than those who are actually greatly superior. Oh yeah, the Dalai Lama's better than me, but I'm pretty close. I'm kind of right up there. That's kind of like a way of acknowledging people are superior to you, but you think that you're a lot closer to them than you really are. That's a different description again for that 6th one. But we see how either of those are really, distorted minds. Yes, Stella.
So, I think that any of these could possibly be a problem depending on your outlook.
Yeah.
Because like you were saying, like, I don't know what's in somebody's mind, but yet, like, and I think even the Buddha said something about this. It's part of the Dharma teaching that when you see somebody who's, doing something wrong, or people like friends that are going down the wrong path, that you should stay away from them. And like I was just wondering, how do you resolve that within yourself, because I have people even in my own family that that I kind of want to stay away from because they fit along those lines, but yet, do I really know what's in there? I don't know. I think I'm just saying this could be problematic, I think, because in a sense, you're judging where they are, right?
There may be some judgment there, but I think if we go back to, again, this was one thing we talked about as one of these factors that can cause the delusions to arise, right? Misleading friends, companions who can kind of take us astray because they can have an influence on us, definitely, without a doubt. If we have some discernment of them as a person who we think we're in danger of going down the wrong track by being in their presence, it's more about kind of protecting our own minds than it is about judging them and putting them down. It's simply acknowledging that where we are at and what we need to protect our own minds, the boundaries we need to have around ourselves to make sure we don't keep going down those pathways, that is important to us in terms of our spiritual development. It's not to say, again, we don't know for sure, but that person is certainly appearing to us at that time as somebody who could be harmful in terms of our behavior. Yeah, the more traditional kind of things, they like people who want to go out and party and take you all over the place and do all these sorts of things that your heart's not in it because you know you really want to engage in spiritual practice. You know, you'd rather be at home studying or meditating or whatever, and they want to be all over the place doing all these kinds of things. My own experience when I started developing some kind of awareness and movement towards the Buddhist path was that I didn't have to make those decisions as often as you might think. You just keep holding to what you're doing, and people sort of naturally lose interest in you because you're not doing the things that they want you to do, and you're not engaging in things in quite the same way. You can still interact with them, but it takes some strength of practice sometimes, and you certainly never lose your compassion or love for them. That's the kind of demarcation as well. If we start looking down on those people and feeling again a sense of superiority to them, that we've got this great spiritual path and they're complete losers or something, I mean, then obviously that would be really, a mind of pride. But I think we do need to be attentive to what will, at least particularly initially when we become involved in Buddhism, it may become less relevant over time because we do start developing our own associations, our own sangha, our own community that we rely upon to a greater degree that reinforce what it is that we want to practice. They become useful, a useful part of our spiritual progress. But in the beginning, when we're starting to branch out and make our way away from all those people and they keep pulling us back, well, then we have to be a little bit more stern around creating those boundaries and saying, I really can't go with you tonight. Sorry, That's just the way we have to be, It's not a judgment. It's just what we need to do to protect our own minds because our minds are not strong enough yet. When we have the strength of mind, then maybe you can go out to the bars with people and hang out with them and actually be kind of a different influence, a different, way of, helping them that might actually blossom into something. You never know. But anyway, okay, let's go on to the last of these. We've got one more type of pride, which is, again, I find it's just really unbelievable. When I first saw this, like I said, I couldn't believe that they went into such detail about pride. Distorted self-importance. Well, they're all distorted, but let's look at what this one is. An example of distorted self-importance would be the inflated attitude of a morally degenerate person who considers themselves to be morally upright and virtuous. Thus, it is distorted since it makes us believe that we are endowed with wholesome qualities that in fact are lacking. I mean, if we look at our world, I'm not going to say who, but we can certainly see there are probably some people that we can use as examples. Not that we should be doing that. Again, Buddhism is very much about using anything we see outside of ourselves, using it as a mirror to see that we have that potential ourselves. And think about perhaps at times in our lives where maybe we have held ourselves to be quite morally upright when what we've engaged in is actually morally despicable. But we can see it in others, and that means, again, we've got that ourselves, that tendency or that possibility. But when we see that this is happening, it's really quite outrageous. It's distorted. It's taking what is normally behavior that is not to be embraced and followed and making that something to be proud of. To be really proud of. I mean, even Venerable Amy Miller, who so many of you know, she was talking in one of the videos for our Discovering Buddhism series about how she worked for a company for a while. This was before she was ordained as a nun. And that was where people were rewarded for how well they lied. Like, where your job description and everything involved deceiving other people so that you could get the contracts and everything that would make it look like you were a really good worker, and that happens in many of our corporations, right? Where people are actually rewarded and there's an embracing of an ethic of deception, of in some way, getting something from other people in these deceiving ways. I mean, again, this is a similar type thing, right? Where we see that any embracing of negative qualities, negative tendencies, and saying this is something to be proud of, to feel good about, to think is something worthy of being rewarded for. That's again a distorted view of pride. Any final questions or comments on these 7?
I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
That's one way, I think, to avoid at least the utterances of it. But again, we have to still look at our minds. What is all that going on underneath the surface? But
I think,
Mhm.
so especially when you see, the Dalai Lama and all the lamas, you tend to feel inferior. And so is that a kind of pride too?
Well,
I mean,
again, it depends upon what you do with that mind, I think, Anne-Marie. I mean, if you focus on that and you go to this extreme where, like, Mary Jo was mentioning, where you're just sort of like honing in totally on your negative qualities and thinking that's who you are, that's, equating yourself with this sense of lacking and sense of inferiority that is not anything cast in stone. Everything can be changed. I mean, the ideal situation in relation to our gurus and our teachers and all these amazing beings who have all these qualities is to acknowledge, yes, that we don't have them yet. That's a part of it. That's what we need to keep working on our development, but not to think that, again, we're stuck there. We actually can do something to move in that direction, to see them as inspirations for us rather than as something that deflates us.
unattainable goal.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what hopefully good spiritual leaders in any tradition, what they are there for is to help us to feel like, they want to embody the qualities that they would like us to develop ourselves and that they preach to others. I mean, that's what we're trying to find in good spiritual guides. So if there is a sense of inferiority, it's meant to be used in a positive way to say, yeah, I can see that the Dalai Lama's got it going on in so many different ways that I don't. I want to work towards that. That's who I want to become. In fact, they often say that about teachers. Be careful who you choose for your teachers because you're going to become just like them.
I'm going to look for a job as a chamber pot.
Huh? Why not? I mean, there was that wonderful film. What was the name of that film? The Japanese man who was emptying the street toilets.
I don't know.
A perfect day, a perfect life, something like that. It was a really sweet film in its own way. I found it a little tedious myself, but that's just my own thing around film sometimes. But it was quite interesting. This man, he was just very humble in his like going around in the streets of Tokyo or whatever with the toilets that he took care of every day. He would go there to do the whole washing out of them and everything that was necessary. It was like a chamber pot person, essentially, Anyway, let me have a few more comments on pride that I think are in these slides, and then we're going to move on to ignorance. I want to talk about the most important thing, perhaps, antidotes to pride. The first one is to reflect on the faults of pride. The faults of pride include its prevention of the attainment of any new knowledge of the Dharma and the generation of any new insights and realizations. Because when we start thinking we've got it all going on and we've got superior awareness and knowledge and whatever, well, then we don't continue to learn. We don't continue to grow. And I think we need to have that. In the Zen tradition, they often refer to a beginner's mind, right? You want to have that kind of beginner's mind. Once you start developing a mind that's full of all this kind of knowledge and information and thinking you've got it all, well, then it becomes a problem. You can't move forward. Really everyone we meet, we should see as a teacher in some way. Maybe not a teacher in the way that we have as like His Holiness or something, but we can learn from others. Everyone has something to teach us. Even those who, again, we might see as examples of the complete opposite of what we want to become, we can learn from them. Also, that has the pride right in the middle there of causing one to be reborn in the lower realms or in a position of lower status when in the higher realms. So you can see it manifesting karmically in that if we follow the mind of pride, it can actually drive us into lower states of existence. It can actually help have us end up with a lower status if we're even in like a human life or what have you. Pride is said to be the state of mind that causes, to some degree, the beings in the God realm to be reborn there, because that is a place of kind of superior qualities and what have you. But when they kind of are born there, the only way to go is down, right? Because they've exhausted whatever good qualities they had that they brought into there. And now, because of that prideful mind, they fall from that state.
Well, one of the other things is, we talk about karma a lot.
Mhm.
And so if somebody's born
Mm.
poor or impoverished or with some problem,
Uh-huh.
the tendency is to say, well, they deserved it. They're
Yeah.
just working out there. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And that's a distorted view of karma. Certainly this whole idea of deserving is very strange in terms of karma. It's an explanation. I often say this when I talk about karma. It's an explanation, not a justification. We're not trying to say, oh, they deserve this and they deserve that and whatever. We're simply saying this is the way it works. And how unfortunate, as we're going to see, one of the forms of ignorance is being ignorant of the law of cause and effect. That's what causes so much of our suffering in the world, is that people don't know how to even create the more positive temporal results in their lives. And we're not putting them down because of that. We feel compassion for them because of that. Because if they had that knowledge and worked according to that knowledge, they would be in a different situation. So it's not something they deserve. That's the wrong language. It's something that they are unfortunately
But
having to experience.
haven't you heard people say, well, they're going to have a karma for what they
Yes.
just did?
Yeah.
Well, that's prideful. Like, I'm better than they
It
are.
is prideful
Yeah.
and unkind.
I think it's a pretty big judgment again, and so we have to be careful how we work with the concept of karma. It's not meant to be, again, as kind of a weapon to wield, towards other people. It's something to just provide an explanation and understanding so that we recognize how we're all in a situation of being under the control of these factors. There's that phrase, and I grew up with in my Catholic upbringing, there but for the grace of God go I. You all know this phrase, right? Well, in Buddhism, it's like there but for the grace of good karma go I, because for whatever reason, I've got the good karma, to have some level of, ability to keep myself fed and, roof over my house and all this. And when I see people who are less fortunate than I am, that's me as well. I'd be there if it wasn't for the good karma that somehow have created the situation I'm in. So it's not about thinking I'm better in that regard. It's thinking I'm the same as them. And it's just a matter of different conditions at different times. So that's a much healthier way to frame karma
It
rather
still
than.
could be you in the next life.
Yeah, it could be me, absolutely.
Just for saying that.
Just and so I think we have to really be careful. I mean, I do hear this from Buddhist practitioners where they say these things about karma. Of course, in the West in general, we have such a distorted view of what karma is because we think it's, first of all, really only about negative stuff. Oh, they're going to get their karma yet, like as if it's really just a tool for meting out punishment for people who have done something wrong. Karma is an operative principle. It's cause and effect. It's just how things are happening in our world. And we all need greater cognizance of it and awareness of it. We're going to see this again coming up shortly in regard to ignorance. If we get to it, I don't know that we'll get to it tonight. Looks like we won't. Getting close to the end of our time. Let's go through at least a few more of these things on antidotes. You can also think about the fault of pride's ability to make us negligent of the welfare of others and to harm them when they denigrate us, right? Because those who tend to come from a place of superiority make them not pay attention to the needs of others often, right? Because it's all about them. It's all about, well, I'm fine, If they show any sort of regard, it's often out of a mind of pity and not real genuine compassion. Another one is to contemplate categories of knowledge not known and qualities that are not yet realized. This is a way of kind of putting ourselves in our place, if you will, not to make us feel miserable, but to acknowledge that we have not yet attained anything that outstanding. Since pride causes us to feel superior and imagine qualities and knowledge we actually do not possess, it can be overcome by thinking about the many categories of phenomena and the sciences that we do not yet know fully, and also by reflecting on the qualities and stages of the path that we have not yet realized or have only realized partially. The idea is that there's a lot more we have accomplished. If we're all that great, well, why aren't we a Buddha yet? If we're all that great, why aren't we even liberated yet? If we're all that great, well, why don't we even have a single realization yet? I mean, if we really are honest with ourselves, we see that we have an awful lot more to accomplish. There's really no need to be kind of superior or feeling superior in regard to our knowledge. Another antidote to pride is to contemplate the equality of self and others and how others contribute to our well-being, actually. Since pride involves seeing the superiority of self and inferiority of others, think about the interdependence of self and other. as well as the way that all our happiness, both temporal and ultimate, arises from others, thus inducing a natural sense of humility. I mean, I point this out frequently, right? How we are dependent upon others. And if it wasn't evident during the pandemic, my gosh, this was a time when we needed others, right? To continue doing what they were doing. Even if you were a frontline person, you still needed to eat and to have, access to everything that would keep you somewhat comfortable so you could continue doing that work. And for many people who weren't working during that time, you absolutely needed everyone to continue to produce the food and make sure the energy and the lights are on and everything so that you continue to have that in your life. But this is the case all the time. It's not just when there's a pandemic that suddenly people do this. People are doing this all the time. We don't live in isolation as some sort of self-contained, self-sufficient unit. And pride tends to hold ourselves in that dimension, right? Like it's me, myself, and I've got it all. I don't need anyone else. And so again, think about that interdependence. Think about the fact that we depend upon things temporally in those ways, but we also more ultimately, because we need others as a basis for our spiritual practice, developing patience, generosity, all these great qualities come about through our interaction with others. And then the last one, think about death and other forms of suffering that we all experience. They often say that death is like the great leveler, kind of makes us realize the sameness of ourselves and all beings. So while pride makes us think more highly of ourselves, all sentient beings, ourselves included, are subject to death, as well as aging, sickness, getting what we don't want, not getting what we do want, and so on. If we really start thinking about the reality that we're all still on the same level, we're all kind of experiencing the same sorts of things, well, then what are we to be so prideful about? Have we escaped death? Have we, gotten over all these forms of suffering? No, we are still subject to them in the way that everyone else is. Okay, that's good enough. Let me go forward to the mindfulness. These are all the things I hope to cover tonight. I guess I'll cover them next week. Having meditated on the antidotes to pride, the ones I just went through, and I'll make these available on the Google Drive. Again, there's a link to the Google Drive on the website. As you see any of the various types of pride arising, apply any of those we discussed to see how they diminish your pride, reflecting on the faults, contemplating the knowledge you have not yet acquired, or qualities you haven't realized, contemplating the equality of self and others, how others contribute to our well-being. That can often bring us to a real place of humility. And then thinking about death and other shared sufferings. And again, this is our sort of common experience. And if you work with those to some degree, see what effect it has on diminishing pride. So pride, again, is one of our crazy roommates that we have in our minds, and it's important to be aware of how it functions and the ways it can manifest so that we don't start having that become our go-to pattern. I mean, I certainly can see my own pride, manage to do that. If that's all I'm able to achieve in this life, that's already pretty major, right? I think we all have to acknowledge that just being able to see these delusions, these crazy roommates for what they are, is already a huge step in the right direction. We can combat them and overcome them through these antidotes, then we have better luck at being able to actually make some progress. So any final comments or questions before we conclude tonight? I didn't go to the book at all, by the way, tonight. Just know that if you want access to that, that's at the Google Drive as well. I think I have it out there, yeah. So you can find that if you'd like to read up on any of these. Again, I have some page references in there, but I don't know that there was that much more that was talked about in the book on that, but let's go ahead and do our dedications then. So we're going to start as usual with reciting the names on the list of those who we are dedicating for. If you have names of people who, again, we have 3 categories, those who have obstacles right now, which can be, problems finding a job or, relationship problems, things like that. Secondly, people who are dealing with illness of any type. And then thirdly, beings who are dying or who have died. We'll add those to the list after each of those categories. So Jana's going to read the names that we do have on the list for each of those 3. Yes.
Get into it.
Okay.
We dedicate the merit created by listening to this teaching To all beings everywhere on every prayer list, we dedicate for the health and long life of all our precious teachers, that they may continue to teach us and guide our practices. We dedicate for all those experiencing obstacles, specifically Jana, those experiencing illness, specifically Lori, Donla. Oh no, I can take you off. You're okay now.
Thank you.
Amanda, Rob, Anne Marie, and Jim Bailey. And those who have died in the last 49 days or who are dying, specifically those who have died due to war and violence, and Lydia Ruiz.
So any names to be added?
Yes, Jeffrey under obstacles.
Jeffrey,
And Mary Jo, you had?
Yes, I have several.
you want the book?
Is that, no, I think it's better for you.
Okay.
Joe,
And
Jay.
which is this under?
illness,
Illness.
actually, illness.
Okay.
Allie J. Karen A. And Kelly
I think I missed the first one.
Joe.
Joe.
Joe J.
Okay. We dedicate for all of them as well.
And at Emily for illness.
Illness, Emily.
She had a bad car accident and is recovering.
Oh, dear.
Okay, so for those beings that we mentioned, their names, as well as anyone else we're holding in our hearts, we dedicate for their welfare. Let's go ahead and dedicate as well with the prayers that we normally do. And Gina's going to be so kind as to lead us in those again. So, right?
Okay, so dedication prayer we'll do once in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I
Quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception
into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayers for His Holiness Dalai Lama. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Tribhagas and Prayera Buddhas, victorious song, Father and Sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the moon's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of Bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate us.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for joining tonight. And I'll be back up here next Thursday. Know that we have 4 more classes? I think 4 more classes.
Not supposed to put it on.
I think so.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
because today's the 2nd, so we have up through the 30th. So we have 4 more classes where we will cover the remainder of this, whatever we can get to. Don't feel bad if we don't get to everything, but we'll continue with this. And then just so you know, there will be a little break because I'm going to be on doing a house sit for Karen over in Sapeo. And I'll do a little mini retreat while I'm there. So that'll be like the first 2 Thursdays in May. So I'm not sure if there's going to be some alternate programming. And then we'll see what happens after that. Probably be coming back up here again in May, but we've got to talk through all the other plans. So, but anyway, thank you all.
Thank
Thank you,
Don.
Dhamma.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks. Eloise, you got my message.